I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I was very excited, but then when I looked at the details and I followed Dan Mertalik, I was like very stressed. I said, it's going to be anticlimactic here. So, 6 years ago, I went through a period of worsening burnout, which necessitated me taking some months off from work. And in that time, I learned many, many different lessons about what I went through and what it means for my colleagues. My wife said to me, honey, you know what, since you went through that experience, you're so much better. I had to think for a minute, because we had just been recently married, and she told me I was perfect. So I didn't had to reconcile how I could possibly get better. At least that's what I heard. So I guess there is something to it. You know, Brian Sexton talks about the 3 good things and says that it improves the physician's psychological well-being, but actually he's noticed that the families and that are even happier as a result. They don't do the 3 good things, but they observe the physicians and they're happier. So I'm in this business for passion, but I'm curious and I have hopes that we keep going. So I had to find that answer for myself. So it wasn't a very planned study. I'm sorry, Michael. I just kind of dove right in and I called up the president of the Resident Spouses Association. And I said, let me just explain what this is about. It turns out she was married to one of the neurologists. That's not a planned thing. But I said, you know, I've been through burnout. I'm very interested to find out the perspectives of the families. She said, good time. You know what, we have a board meeting tonight, and I'll run it by the board and see what they think. So I went, and next morning, first beep I get a call from her. We want you to come down. It's like, wow, I've got the Nobel Prize. I wouldn't get such attention. We want you to come down in a week's time. So in a week, there was this meeting. They had their monthly meeting, and I was to come, and I was going to talk, but I wanted to hear what things were. So the conversation went, honey, I'm going to be a little late tonight because I have a meeting after work. And she's like, neurology? Well, not exactly. And she said, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to go down and I'm going to talk to a bunch of young women, and I'm going to tell them my story, and they're going to tell me theirs. Should be just take an hour or so. Hope you don't mind. Well, she heard that, she said, and then I said, well, is that okay? And she said, yes. Now, I don't know if you ever had the experience when somebody has said yes to you and you're not sure if yes is the meaning of the word. So anyways, I arrive at the meeting, and I sit down and I say, looking for the agenda. And they said, well, we have a lot more people here. You are the agenda, you know. So whatever about fooling some neurologists with some data, it's like, that was the pressure on. So I told my story about how I went through burnout and a few experiences, and I want to hear from them. And so they started talking. They started talking. The stories that I heard, it went on. There was everybody was jumping in to tell their story about what they'd observed about their spouses, predominantly females, about resident burnout. And I was just like, whoa. And then I looked at my watch, and it's like 3 hours later. There was no break, there was no coffee break, and I don't know, maybe the meeting would still be going on if I hadn't said, do you want to stop? I mean, the stories were amazing. I mean, it wasn't just on the spouses, but I mean, that's the book I need to read. I was writing down these notes. I mean, just wouldn't believe. And you'll see some stuff when we told you in this survey about what we found out. So Susan Meline, who did a lot of work on this, and this is on YouTube, she said to me when we had to do a project for our leadership college, I told her the story. We need to survey the residents. And I actually said, I kind of rubbed my feet on this because I kind of had established a relationship with them and I wanted to be an ongoing dialogue. I thought if we surveyed them, the milieu will not be as good. But anyway, for those of you who can't see at the back, I've got like sucker written across my forehead, and I said, okay, Susan, we'll do it. And so we went in to do this survey. Now I made up, it's kind of this backwards, I made up this slide at the end, and I thought maybe all this research has been done, but I want to point you out, just to put this in the scope, is that Richard Gunderman wrote a very nice article about physician well-being. We talk a lot about the professional well-being, but the biggest determinant, in his opinion, he rates that stuff, is for personal well-being, is your long-term personal relationship through the time. So then I went and did a literature search, and spouses, and I was like, oh, Lottie Derby and Tate Shanafeld have covered this. Oh my God, it's just duplicative. But no, they have done research in this area, like every year of Burnout. But I think that and spouses have been assessed for their burnout, but the spousal assessment of how they think there is a burnout, I didn't find much, so here's justification for me. Sorry. Well, we had, just in case we went to do this burnout survey, we have burnout here at Wake Forest, and it's very similar to what you might find at any university. So we have burnout. So we knew there was burnout at in our residence, and it's been consistent over 2 years. So basically, the Resident Spouse Association, which is at present at many different academic medical centres, their mission is to provide support and fellowship. In our group, they have 100 members. I mean, there is a predominance of women. There is also a predominance, to be clear about this, about spouses who are kind of out of town. We have the local residents, but those who are needing support. So I'm just trying to create milieu. And in the survey, which I'm going to describe, there was about 58 respondents, so 21%. So we think we got a good, it is a select group, was a good response. And we asked them, sort of like a modified Maslow burnout, have you observed these things in your spouse, the resident? And then, of course, the big thing with surveys, which I like, is the contextual and the items and describe the themes that are there. And so I'm going to give you a short summary of some of the major ones in some of the questions. So it was 18 items, and it's sort of like Maslow. We were asking the spouses to describe the burnout symptoms they saw, and we asked them some things about themselves, 6 items. I was trying to think about the proper term. Some of the demographics, are you male, female, is predominantly female. Are you in healthcare? 1/3 were in healthcare. We didn't get into it in detail. But we asked the feelings about how they felt were, number 1, are you happy with your relationship? Number 2, would you marry a physician again? And number 3, have you ever considered being divorced? And we asked them to make comments. What do you think are the causes of burnout? I mean, this conference knows what the cause is, but let's hear from them. What do you think the causes are? And if there is burnout, why aren't you doing something about it? Well, we know from the physician end and what they said, but let's get their perspective. And what would they like to see as an intervention? Because we're like, it's not what we think they need, but what are their wants? So here's question number 1. I apologize for the graphics, but even if you have positive psychology, you say, at work, my spouse, partner, comes home too tired to do some of the things I do, I don't know, make it this, but there's 0% said it never happened. So at some point, and frequently it was sometimes, but here we have often and very often. So chances greater than most that after you get through this day as being a resident, the resident comes home in the opinion of the spouse, burned out, too much to do any work. Well, maybe he's happy, he's done a good job, but no. Did you have a good day at work, honey? No, comes home irritable. 75% of the time. You see? Sometimes, very often, very few times that they say rarely. So it's very high that they're having the symptom as reported by the spouses. Well, maybe they're making progress and it's all for the greater good, and they'll feel with the right position. Hang on there, honey, once we get through residency, life will be great. But no, they're becoming more and more cynical. Rather than when their competency is coming up, it makes no sense. The intern, I know nothing, and the PGY2, they're becoming more and more cynical. And again, we have, rarely is only 25%, and you know, most times and often or very often. Now, just to give you a quick summary is, are you satisfied, and I'll come to this at the end, are you satisfied with the relationship? 80%. That's maybe a disconnect. We'll come to that in a minute. Would you marry a physician again? 1 in 5 says no. You know, have you considered divorce? 1 in 5. And these factors overlap with what we're going to see at this conference. I'm not going to, but I just want to point out is, this whole thing that we have to explore is they're saying, well, at least your boss is in there and they're for you, and the people are working in the healthcare. But they're telling, and it's coming up as a theme, that they're underappreciated by the staff, patients, and faculty. You know, your attending is there and the nurse is there, but I'm not even appreciated by them. And the other part is, well, why don't you talk to your buddy? So the residents are not talking to each other. And here's Cormac O'Donnell's going to go out on his own limb, is because if I come and say I'm an EEG reader, and I talk to my buddy and I say, it's very hard reading these EEGs, it's too much. And he said, no, Cormac, you know, buckle up there. So I've lost a friend. So sometimes talking to your co-residents, and residents who have come to me for some unofficial counselling said the same thing, why don't you talk to the residents? So within their group, whether they're communicating with their spouse, they're not even communicating with the other residents. It's my theory, I have no evidence, but I'm just throwing it out there. And so the comments are good, not good, sorry. But we have to also realize that, you know, we make changes within our residents, and I hear this a lot, that the residents, they may not report, but when they go off into other subspecialties, so the surgical resident is rotating on, not in urology, goes in off service, and they don't get treated properly. So you can, you know, make urology, make neurology, make orthopedics good. You know, one would think losing 30 pounds is a good thing, but in fact, it's a fact that this surgical resident never gets to eat, you know. So why don't they get treatment? Well, the problem is they can't get time off for anything, and there's a lack of marriage therapists. So if the residency program director says, Johnny, we're all about the wellness here, why don't you go and see a therapist? The times you gave me off, they're booked. They're fully booked, there's no mental health. So it's a kind of a dilemma here. And by the way, I cannot, as Lottie Derby said today, I'm worried about the stigma. But let's say that the schedule gets together and they're cool with it. The problem is, who's going to mind the baby? You know, it's another thing, a barrier to get there, lack of childcare. And that was a theme that kind of resonated in other discussions I've had with them. So the residents are, whether it's on a spouse, they're just unaware. And it's like, talk to your wife and say, I'm burnt out, but I don't. Just talk about it. They're not even recognizing it within themselves, you know. And again, somebody wants to emphasize that, they put in caps, unhealthy relationship between residents and attending, because they would think in a workplace, if they're having a problem, go tell the attending and they'll get it figured out. But they're seeing role models, as we know, the attendings are burnt out. So the odds are against us. So what they would like is to have workshops, education. I mean, I should have known about this, the spouses, like burnout. We thought, oh, doctors, very self-sufficient, leaders in the field, but we should have known about this. And they're not obeying the duty hours, you know, work after work. I thought you were told, there was the thing about work duty hours, you shouldn't be working longer. And they want processes in place to facilitate this resident attending. Why don't you speak up? Support and family groups. So, back to my wife again. I said, honey, you remember that group that I met with? Where I said I'd just stay for an hour, and these young women, I spent the whole night with them? I gotta meet them again. And there was a reason. Because I said, why don't you formulate what you need, and I'll be the conduit, and I'll try and talk to the ACGME director. Well, be careful what you ask for. I got a big long letter of all the needs, and this is a summary. Identifying with the current situation that the vacation is inflexible, so these things are in place. There is health insurance, but they're being punished by health care. You know, couples, they can't get health care together, and there was lack of childcare. And this was compared to other residencies. And they said, why don't they give free meals like there is at other residencies someplace? So there's a discrepancy between, this is a spouse, the president, writing this letter, and it was fully referenced. All those points were referenced. This happens at Ohio State, this happens in XYZ. So I was like, how could she write this letter? So I just, and of course, she's a labor lawyer. So she had it all packed down. I mean, her manuscript would have gone in if this was a manuscript. These are the needs. So, oh, I ruined that. So let's pretend your husband is working all the time. You have a young child who's 2 years old. You have no one to talk to. Very simple. Call your friend, call your mother, they'll sympathize. Well, it doesn't work that way all the time, because this is what they're hearing. You know, I know it's not good, but you know, at least you're married to a doctor, you know? You're your friend from high school, he's married to this guy, he hasn't even got a job, you're married to a doctor, lots of money, life should be great. And this is a book that's written by Jordan Hager. She's a therapist. She wrote about her experience because she was married to a resident. She's not in this field, and she said she gave this book, or wrote this book, some medical students, when they get that line, well, then you're married to a doctor, here you go. So my book, the books that's being written about it is, and my friend from North Carolina, Wayne Sotil, I was aware from this because I live in North Carolina, I've been to his talks about all these issues. It's nothing new, and he's counseled, he can speak for himself, but he might say it's not counseling of the individual, you need to counsel the couple to start with. And we talk about coaching, and that should be the way. Now the AMA, at a national, what's the resource, has the AMA Alliance, which is for family physicians, and they do advocacy, and potentially there could be a national thing to provide support, if you believe it's important to support the families, which could be better. But they're involved with advocacy, or you know, the wife or the husband is working in the opioid epidemic, to kind of be a partnership. I don't know if there's the same community. We've had a meeting in North Carolina, but I'm just throwing this out about resources. There's a very good podcast, you can tell them Married to Doctors, it goes on every week, and Laura McElderry has taken a coaching course, so she understands it, but you know, limited resources. But there's a podcast, a lot of good articles in it, and she has a workbook that she's distributed, which you can go through and kind of deal with this, I mean, essentially loneliness. I mean, people talk about tired, and I think really what they're having is loneliness. If you ever think about when you go to your day, I'm so tired, it's like, oh, come on, you did a good job, and then maybe your tiredness goes away. So I'm a sleep physician, Dan and I've talked about it, like, what is tiredness? Is tiredness loneliness? Is it depression? And so we kind of use those terms. So, but the thing is, when we're in physician health, I hear, well, you're talking about the demographics, well, what are you going to do? So Cormac, you open this wound, what are you going to do? So I thought, I think I'm going to call the Gottman marriage therapist. Everybody on board about Gottman and marriage therapy? So I called the local person, and I'm going to make a case to get some counseling for people on marriage therapy, because I think that's the way. So they said, I called them up, and they were very interested. But they said, this is what you need. They should come to a program, and it is very impactful. It's a 2-day program about bringing baby home. Well, you can imagine, don't take it personally, Dan, the surgeon's like, you think I'm going to a course to learn about infant formula and changing diapers? It's like, no. It's designed for if you're thinking of having a baby. I'm not an obstetrician, but if you're in the process of having a baby, or if you have a baby. And the point is, it's not so much how to raise a child, it's so that the couple can learn how to relate to an added stressor. So when stressors come, I'm a big believer, we don't know what stresses the addition, we have enough stress on physicians, what's tomorrow, but if we work together, can't we get over it? So that might be something that would make an impact. So they kind of get to talk, and they're away from, and they're talking about how they would deal with that stress. Not so much that the baby is colicky, that's good, but they're alerted, because another stress, first of all, before they have children is stress, and then you bring another thing which should be a happy time, and many times, irrespective of being medicine, it can be a stressful family. So I think that this is we've done a lot. This would be work, this would be after work and sleep, so we do a lot of system changes, and I'm all a believer of that. I believe about the theme, we've got to make system changes, individual resiliency. But I'm wondering if we should focus more on the other aspects of the sleep and it bleeds over, because when there is a problem, we don't know where to start. Does the sleep deprivation link over there? Now, it's not work-life balance. This person, if he sleeps 8 hours, works 8 hours, hangs out for 8 hours, he's probably very boring, I don't want to meet him. So we can work on, there could be integration. I believe in taking a nap during the day. And if the mother takes off during the day to go and meet her kindergarten teacher and leaves the OR and takes a call home, but better work-life integration. Because professional athletes, yes, they're focused on during the day, but they would say that those that get the better rest perform, not those necessarily that train harder. So, I think you've seen sort of the conclusions. It's kind of sold itself. Overwhelming signs of burnout, it's adding stress. And I wonder if they just, why they're still satisfied. I mean, they're there for the long haul, and that's a good thing, but you know, sometimes it could break 1/5 of thinking about divorce. And we know that divorce rates are high among physicians, maybe higher. But I just want to leave you with 3 thoughts. Number 1, if they're describing distress and they're happy with it, I mean, is this the new norm and it's never going to change? I kind of like to change the needle on that. You know, it's professionals, all professionals, even if you're not a professional, life is stressful, this bit, we can make the change. Number 2, if you think, oh, that's a good idea, if you think, oh, that was a good idea to kind of engage everybody, what should I do? So what have I learned? So if I went in and told you that I went in to a group of 30 women and I was speaking for more than 2% of the time, you wouldn't believe me. There's no way that's going to happen, right? So I wasn't really doing anything, but I was listening. I think active listening, and they wanted to be heard, and felt they weren't being heard. They're telling the resident to go tell the attending, or they might meet somebody, they feel like they're not being heard. So I think active listening is the part. And it's only a first step. I haven't solved anything, and feeling like they have an advocate that will help. Because the resident doesn't want to take off the attending and go on the record that they spoke up, but these are the things that they don't listen. And so the last thing I'm thinking is, should we do the focus? Because if one of the things about physician distress, one awful outcome is physician suicide. And maybe, you know, I'm not an expert on suicide, but I do get the sense that if work is driving you crazy and it causes a lot of stress, but if you feel like you've let down your family, that might be, unfortunately, the thing that tips somebody off to commit suicide. So maybe if we're trying to make an impact there, should we think about couples counseling? So I have a new measure. Maybe you'll agree. I'm going to throw in another one. Maybe we should look at this perspective and ask this single item question to find out about resident burnout. Thank you.
Thank you, Burnout. It's a nice presentation, very thoughtful. And it makes me think to myself, because relationships are the hardest thing to sustain when you're under stress and you're unavailable. And I just wonder, it's been a long time since I was in residency, but I wonder in any training programs there are those kinds of opportunities for people to learn how to deal with the relationships, how to improve them, and to relate. And I don't know, maybe you guys who are involved in residency programs can tell me. I don't know, but are there programs out there that help people learn? And certainly we learn how to deal with patients. We don't learn how to deal with
I'm open to comments for the audience, because I could say we don't have much. It might be, I'd be interested if people have a different system. I mean, we have an employee assistance program, and that's kind of every employee goes there for financial difficulties, marital difficulties. So we don't have something like that, Russell, to start off with, but maybe others might have something that addresses the issue.
I know some programs have robust networks for spouses, like UF has like a really good network for spouses of trainees. We talked about doing something similar, trying to create more events where you can have mixers where you make it about how the spouses who can have significant others can actually mix, so they can develop their own network. awareness is a huge, huge part of it. I don't think there's much.
I know at Ohio they have some type of program for the residents and their spouses where they host a monthly gathering for them to go to some type of social event. They pay for it. For instance, they'll do a baseball game, they'll do a movie night, they'll do a nice dinner, and they'll pay for them to go get dinner with them and their spouse and their other colleagues and their spouses. And I know they also offer on-site babysitters during those events. So they can either choose to take their kids to the baseball game with them, or they can use the babysitter that Ohio provides and spend time with their spouse.
It would seem like there is a real opportunity there, and I mean, when you understand the languages of love, if you've ever read that, very pop psych type of thing, but a very simple approach to relationships and understanding each other, you have a really important opportunity there whereby people can learn how to grow together, because often they get married in a certain phase of their social and emotional development, and all of a sudden it changes, and they don't have the skills or the resources.
I mean, if I didn't highlight it, just to answer your question, it's a good, they want to have the marital council, it has to be a bit more structured. Let me tell you why. Have you ever been to a social event, I'd say? Yes, we have them. But we'll take an example. We went to the baseball game, and my husband and her husband, all they were talking about was work and how many G's they read, and it's like, so it has to be, I'm all about this, the social part, it just ask the questions, you know, to bring it out. But it is a good point, if it is there, but you have to ask, you know, talk about having a real better questions, because we have meetings and we kind of avoid it, but bring out, like, have very good, deeper conversations. Yes?
I have some concerns about this approach as a woman, I think. I'm not coming from a medical family.
Okay.
We are both professionals, married for 25 years. We had exact same needs and problems. So I don't think this problem is unique to physicians. And also when you talk about the spouses, it looks like, to me at least, puts the burden again on female spouses. So I would be very cautious about putting this agenda out and then making it as a spousal issue. That another concern on the female spouse to improve their husband's lives. So that's how I see it a little bit.
I'm not just saying that I agree. I don't have any preconceived notions about, no, I hear what you're saying. Mickey?
Just thinking about a couple of differences. One, I think it's easiest to believe data that you analyze yourself. So I got Tate's national data from 2019 and Peyton's colleagues from the AMA as well. And look and saw for myself that in fact 36% of physicians are working more than 60 hours a week compared to only 6% of others. So there is a difference in terms of work hours. But the other piece is, years ago it was true. It was, you know, male doctor, wife was at home. But that's really not the case anymore.
Great, but the examples he gave on his sample
Those were
was
the
female loaded samples.
predominantly women in the organization showing up that were telling these stories. But now we have in a lot of residency programs, in Stanford, a lot of our programs are 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the men aren't showing up to the spouses of
Absolutely.
residents. But, you know, all that they would. But yeah, that's...
It's back in, yeah.
We have significant other groups quarterly at our hospital, and we have them separately for residents and for fellows, where we have social events, but they are separate. And so we do the 5 love languages. We talk about communication, because I do think there are differences in medicine where, you know, he comes home at the end of the day and he's crying because one of his patients died, and I don't know how to help. Things that are really specific to medicine that we don't often talk about, and we really talk about, emphasize ways to communicate, and also having the responsibility on the resident or fellow that if you don't have insight into what you need when you're grieving, you can't expect your partner to know how you feel. And so we do the onus of responsibility on both to be able to really, you know, if I've had a death that day, I come home at the end of the day and my husband knows, well, either she needs ice cream, she needs 20 minutes by herself, she needs to go to a movie. But there is equal responsibility between the spouses, but it's a matter of talking about it too.
I'll just make a comment, I don't know when they answer the question, do you know what your husband's job's about? I mean, they read it off Google, a doctor goes in, he treats patients, hands on. But I don't think they really know what they're going on. So when the resident comes home and said that he had to cover the ER, go to the OR, go to the wards, like sounds chaotic, but there was one person who was a volunteer in the hospital, and she said, I know exactly what it sounds like, but you know, is he really over-reporting stress? This can't be possible, you know.
We also do tours of the hospital.
That's exactly it. So I think that would start it.
A visual of what the ICU looks like versus the clinic.
Completely, that's definitely.
Have that piece. You can't possibly expect them to understand or to have the exact words that are going to help you, but it's a matter of being able to talk about it and finding your support needed as a physician, and then opening the communication, what you can talk about and what you can't.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I'll just say that one of the most valuable things in our program, and it was really just several hours of administrative work that we had an administrative assistant in our office do, was pull out our insurance panel, go through, call every psychologist listed in the panel and ask them, are they accepting new patients? Do they do couples work? Do they specifically have any expertise in working with physicians and residents? How quickly could they get our people in? And really, you can tell a lot by how quickly people return those calls and whether they return those calls or not, and then how willing they are to have that conversation themselves instead of having their administrative assistant handle it. So for us, we ended up, you look at your panel, and there could be 50 or 60 people on that, but if at the end of the day, you have 5 to 10 really good leads who say, I am really interested in working with physicians and their families, or I have an expertise in couples work with physicians and their families, and then a place where you can, the moment that people say, I'd like to do this couples work, you have to get them to somebody who gets it, because all it takes is one terrible experience with a couples counselor who doesn't know what it's like to work with physicians, and they'll never go again. So I think that kind of administrative pre-work to get them in the hands of somebody who you feel good about is really worth it. Sometimes you only have one shot.
Yeah, I was interested in this gender inequity here, and I was thinking there's a real opportunity here to be proactive. We know from the data that women residents are more likely to get burned out than the male, and so it seems to me that we really ought to be finding ways to get the male partners.
Yes.
And I don't know that they need to be married. I think there's a lot of couples relationships. There's a lot of non-heterosexual relationships that we also ought to be open to. And I'm just brainstorming in proactive ways. In our institution, they have lots of activities for the residents when they're during the term, 2 weeks of orientation. I don't think we're doing anything for the spouses or the partners. And I just think that that's an opportunity to make the partners aware of the resources so that they can direct their partners to EAP and all that as well. That's one thing that I'm taking from this.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cormac. That was an awesome talk. I think the other huge value in doing all this is because this is a different lens to shed light on the experience of residents, because I think people are not necessarily listening to things that are coming from inside the medical complex. They're not. Has anyone read Resident Wellness is a Lie?
Yes.
Parts 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
It's been circulated. I think it's had 50,000 reads each one of those parts. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have read that. Right. The resident experience is getting more attention through the eyes of a non-resident than it is through the eyes of a resident, because people think that from inside the medical complex the views are biased. But I think here you're getting the views that the general population can relate to. And I think you're going to need the buy-in from the general population if things are going to get better. It's just not happening from just us. So I think this is really important.
Can I say, you mentioned the AMA Alliance, right?
Yeah.
My wife is a doctor and I'm not a doctor, so I kind of represent,
Okay.
So it's 50-50 at this point. The women are probably going to be majority, like across the world. So at some point, we're going to AMA Alliance has not actually adopted this as one of their priority issues, but it should. I think you all have pointed that out. Burnout is a very, very personal thing, and the physicians are basically going to go to their long-term relation. Their parents and their spouses are going to be the most immediate affected, and they are going to play the role, the long-term role in any kind of recovery. So we have to pay attention. And organizations like the AMA Alliance is a great place to do it. And I think I promise to take that message back to them. I'm part of the Alliance, and I think as the leadership, they have not done enough to acknowledge these things. Primarily because it's a vulnerability that no one wants to admit. I think there are things that are left unsaid most of the time because of this. Spouses are even more vulnerable than probably the partner. It's just like, you're not in control, so how can you deal with it? So I think there are cultural issues we have to work through. I guess this is my first attending this conference, but I think I'm learning a lot.
So by the way, my last disclosure, sometimes I'm hard to interpret. I have the most wonderful wife, by the way. Thank you.